Hello everybody and welcome back to Brewmasters, where we're talking to accomplished homebrewers for D&D 5th edition. Today we're speaking with the mods of the Discord of Many Things, the official Discord of the Unearthed Arcana subreddit. I will clarify, to prevent any confusion, these are not the mods of the Reddit but of the Discord, but you will find the Reddit mods in the Discord, so with that out of the way, let's introduce our roundtable of speakers. Damian, take it away.
Hello, my name is Damian. I'm from Germany. I'm a moderator on the Discord of Many Things. I am usually the disruptive element in any civil discussion by just being me. I do homebrew a lot. I'm not a player. I exclusively GM. For 2 years now, I have brewed. Mostly just for my home game. Occasionally I post them somewhere. I am working on a monster manual type of deal that is just focused on celestials and the beings of the heavens and how you might implement such beings into your game.
Fantastic. It's always great to have more angels to kill. Thank you for coming on the show. Next up, we have NASA.
Hello. My internet moniker is NASA, or I'm from NASA on Reddit. I am the server owner of the Discord of Many Things and one of its moderators. I am most well known, probably outside of that regard, as the creator of Talent Trees, and a somewhat aging ranger known as yet another ranger variant, Yarv. I live in the flyover country cornlands of America.
Thank you for coming on the show. It's great to have you. And last but not least is Nerdhogg.
Hi, my name is Nerdhogg. I'm from the UK. I'm a moderator on the Discord of Many Things. Most of my content is in blog post articles on nerdhogg.blogspot.com, most of which are to do with the different creatures you see in the monster manual and various other supplements, and looking at how they might exist and interact within your games outside of combat. So if you've ever wondered what Kruthic swarms are up to, or what fire newts are up to when they're not invading and conquering new lands, that might be something that you are interested in. Most of my homebrew is for my home stuff, so I don't really publish it much online, which is probably for the best.
Oh, so shy, so modest, but I can appreciate that. Okay, well, let's warm up with a homebrew challenge, shall we? I'm going to be challenging each of you tonight to come up with a new homebrew item on the spot. We're going to start top down, so Damian, you're up first.
Oh, fuck. Oh, God.
For Damian, would you come up with a magic weapon for us, please?
No, there's no theme. Just nothing. Just come up with a magical weapon.
Some of us would call that the opportunity for creative exploration, Damian.
Oh, yeah, fuck off.
Freedom of expression.
Would you like a theme?
Give me a theme, please.
Let's say radiant.
Radiant. Oh, that's my fucking jam. Magical item, radiant. I'm thinking of a mace, but a mace in the sense of it is not a metal thing, but like a crystal thing. And it works like a lamp. So you have this little switch on, and so you can and when you damage people with it, you give them good ideas, but then they're also dead. So it's a fun one.
Very nice.
I call it the lamp lighter.
I like it. NASA and Nerdhogg, you guys have a think about some ideas, but in the meantime, we'll get into the interview properly. So. It's only recently that you guys have come into power. You're the new mods of the Discord of Many Things. So I'm curious what you're doing with the place that hasn't been done before. What ideas do you have for the future?
No, certainly. We've been going through our big mod list of issues, things that we have had suggested to us. We have a custom bot that gets suggestions and sends them our way, and you can anonymously suggest things as well. We also are working on a compendium, which will be released bi-weekly and will be posted on our Unearthed Arcana and perhaps some other places around the internet. And if you would like to join or contribute, just join the Discord.
Sounds like an awesome project. Have you guys been coping with the challenges of moderating a Discord?
There's pleasures as well as challenges when it comes to moderating a server this big. We have a very good group of very active brewers.
Thing is, with the Discord, the most time spent moderating for us is like trying to craft the environment so every voice gets heard and there's like a very welcoming environment. Probably also the structure we are going for with the split between like just regular old mods and like the how do we call them now? We changed it.
Counselors and the town guard.
Oh right, yeah, we have the town theme now.
We recently evolved the theme to be a bit more welcoming and less confusing to some new people.
Yeah, I believe it was dog themed before. Is that right?
Yeah. We had doggos and service puppers, which was ultimately just a meme from the owner two owners ago.
Wow. Because, yeah, I mean, it's primarily about building a community, right?
Yeah.
And how do you build a community? That's like the big question.
Yeah, I mean, an issue that I've been noticing, or not so much an issue, something we've been focusing quite a bit on as staff, is not only sort of making sure that people can be heard, but also making sure that people take the time to listen as well. Because especially with something like D&D, which requires a lot of open communication, you need to make sure that the environment that people are talking in is one where they actually are going to sit down and read what people have to say, especially when it's things like mechanics and views on certain social issues related to the game, where people have very strong opinions that they formed over a long period of time, and then they just tend to gloss over alternative perspectives. So we're making quite a few steps as well to sort of give people the space to be heard, but also give people incentives to use that to pay attention to what other people are saying and communicate effectively.
Not only that, but also that these opinions and like styles of balance are always in a bubble. And when the people come here, this bubble gets bigger. So certain views or certain ways to do things are differing grades of appropriate when it comes to homebrew or like balance and stuff. Like and then with the recent addition of the guidelines, we also trying to like, how do we want conduct to be taking place here on the Discord of many things.
That makes sense. I think it's always tricky to deal with a very large community. I mean, you're dealing with people coming in from Reddit, all other Discords, other microcosms of, I guess you call them cliques, throughout the community. How do you incorporate so many people in such a small space?
The trick is most of them aren't active.
Yeah. I mean, whilst we do have over 7,000 members at this point, I think, a lot of them are mostly just spectating on what's going on. So it makes managing things a lot easier because a lot of people are taking a very passive approach to it, which is the same with all online communities. I'm sure you'd have the exact same with the Unearthed Arcana subreddit and various other cliques and the like. But a lot of managing as well. I mean, you can see in the server we have a lot of different channels. We try to sort of move conversations as much as we can to make it so that it gets not very cluttered, and also so that people can sort of fine-tune what conversations they're taking part in and just not being overwhelmed by everything coming in.
This also is kind of a pattern with just any Discord. We actually just got access to the community statistics for Discord, and that gives a baseline for all Discords, and then also tracks your progress over time. And we actually have engagement that's almost 50% higher than the average Discord in terms of number of lurkers to number of active participants.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the other day we had a member come in and like the comment was, "Hey, I like to lurk a bit before engaging with the community, but you all seem so friendly that I just like open up." So we, just by anecdotal evidence, we are doing something right.
Yeah, I mean, that must be kind of a landmark, because I imagine much of our community is inherently quite introverted, or the shyer types. Not to say that there aren't plenty of extroverts as well, but I imagine there must be some kind of a slant on that.
Speaking of, as the resident extrovert, it is very interesting, because my observation is that this is primarily like looked at as like these people who are dealing with stuff in their own head a lot, and being like very extroverted in many ways, wondering why is like GMing or something like so difficult for you, because it comes natural to me. And I assumed at the beginning everyone who was a GM or DM is just also an extrovert. But no, these are storytellers. They craft very detailed, rich worlds, and I'm sitting here like, okay, I know now what I'm dealing with. This is interesting. So it's a very introverted hobby, I would say, because it occupies so much time in so many different things, like research or world building, or simply just writing a backstory for an NPC. Especially for GMs, it's like a very like cosmos you can like craft, and that is where they like find their enjoyment out of this whole ordeal. And I'm here like, I like yelling.
Oh, for sure. So do you find it like a unique challenge to accommodate different types of players?
Players, yes, but also that is, I think it is in the DMG, or I read it somewhere, that there are very many different player types, and that is fine. Not everyone engages with the story or with the game on the same level. I think it's like not panicking and asking your players, please tell me honestly, did you enjoy it and why? It comes down to communication. And if they come back for each weekend, you're probably doing something right. Or they're desperate, I don't know.
Yeah, I think player feedback is super important. One of my Dungeon Masters recently started using a system called, I think, Stars and Wishes. Each session, you ask the players to provide you stars, which would be like moments when they or someone else did something that was really cool or that they enjoyed, and then wishes are things you wish would be in the next session.
That is very interesting. The thing is, with a sort of different game of like mystery and suspense, you can't really do the wishes, because I want to surprise my players. Hey, I wish this thing wouldn't eat my face, but well, yeah, hey, it will though, probably.
Well, I think it can. Oh, sorry, go on, Nessa.
I've actually seen a few other kinds of attempts at doing this. I found the blog where the Stars and Wishes came from. And I've noticed it in several other RPGs as well, and people kind of porting mechanics from those other RPGs. Burning Wheel, for one. The players write their beliefs and those kind of direct play. And I've seen people take XP mechanics from some PBTA things and kind of include those, having bonds that grow with other players and stuff. You get a lot of that in homebrew mechanics. People who are typically story gamers will bring these things to D&D because they want the aesthetics of D&D and the player base of D&D without necessarily it just being a murder hobo spree kind of thing.
That's an interesting point, NASA. There, you want the player base of D&D. That's why I'm playing D&D.
Well, I think that a big part of homebrewing in general is like being able to dip your toes into the wider world of TTRPGs, which can be quite intimidating for new people, and just kind of getting tastes of other games and then bringing that into what you're already familiar with without necessarily learning a whole new system.
Yeah. It's easier to tell people like, hey, let's play a heavily homebrewed game of D&D instead of, hey, you're all rats trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic mall. So
True.
That game exists. It's brilliant, by the way.
Just imagining a DM out there who's gaslighting their players like, we're going to play D&D today, except all the rules are different. Just introduce them to like Shadowrun or something.
I can say that I've run games that are not too far off from that.
I have a sneaking suspicion that my game will go that way too. I wrote them in with D&D, the promise of D&D, and from the sneakily backside, I just want to play. I don't know, cyberpunk.
Yeah, I'm definitely hankering for some cyberpunk content more often these days than fantasy.
Then you should buy my next book.
Oh, what is that?
Oh no, it's just my next campaign that I'm writing. It has elements of that, of cyberpunk, but yeah, it's a lot. But I'm like world building this whole thing, and the campaign that I'm running currently is basically just a prequel to that. So I'm dipping my toes into like, hey, how do I want this world to be?
So is there any other homebrews at the moment that you guys are all currently burrowing into? Maybe something that NASA's working on right now?
Oh, no. So I have a couple popular-ish. I don't want to say popular because known within our little sub-community brews. One of them is Talent Trees, which is a complete replacement for the feat system that essentially breaks down all the half feats and normal feats into two and adds about 100 feats more additional content, and then ties those to your skill proficiencies and to specialties that you can then delve into, including like weapon specialties and things like that.
Very interesting.
It's been pretty highly updated on the Reddit, and I'm working on version 2 very slowly. I've currently it was supposed to be done this month, but we'll see about that. I'm currently working on the version 2 and going through and finding the clunky things that have come back from players who have been giving very extensive feedback. I've been lucky to have received so much feedback on this brew. It's been phenomenal, and both Reddit and users on Discord have been. I get pings every week with people asking like a question about this feature or that feature, or telling a play experience. It's been really a great like homebrew experience.
That's amazing. It sounds like quite an intensive brew.
Yeah, you can find it on Reddit on the Unearthed Arcana subreddit. If you search Talent Trees, I think it only has a single release, but
fantastic. And for Nerdhogg?
Oh, geez. So unlike a lot of the people on the server, a lot of my homebrew tends to be just things that work for me at my table. I'm a lot less concerned about how other people view my brews. So like when I create stuff, I rarely actually put it in these channels. Like it's super interesting to see what other people are making, but I'm just aware that what I'm making only needs to work from my games because I'm the only person who's really going to be using it. And a lot of the brews and stuff I do are mostly more small tweaks of things. So, for example, somewhat recently, there was the Unearthed Arcana for the, I think it's the Onomancy Wizard, the True Names one. And so I got quite frustrated with that because I feel like True Names is such an evocative and interesting concept. But locking it into one subclass on one class felt very limiting, especially from a world building perspective. So I made that into a whole system of how you could do true names as like a thing that any player, like barbarians, non-casters of any kind, can have access to.
Fantastic.
And then I also did some, I've done minor brews in the past that are generally just stupid. Like, well, I think one of my first brew things was I was making farmer-inspired subclasses. And the goal was to do one for every class. And I think I got to about 5 and then just gave up because it was getting really stupid.
I remember those. Those were a lot of fun.
Did you make the Spudborn?
Oh, that was Bladebot.
No, it was like, so farming is in like down south country, combine harvester, ooar farming. So I had like a cleric, a bee domain that was all about like having like a celestial swarm from your beekeeping. I had druid, it was like druid of the crop circles, where they could like, as a final subclass thing, they could just like abduct cows. Like, I think the Paladin was probably the most usable one in a general campaign. It was Oath of the Luddite, and it was essentially just an anti-construct, anti-magic item one. Just all about going back to the good old days where things were simpler, and tools were simpler, and you worked on the sweat of your brow and not through the use of constructs and these artifice machines.
Amazing.
It's the Boomer Paladin.
Oh my god.
It's the Boomer Paladin, holy shit.
That's very impressive. I may need you to give us all the link for that.
I mean, impressive isn't the word I would use for it.
It's certainly some adjective.
I would also like to shout out that Nerdhogg, though his like he was saying, his homebrew things tend to be more niche like that, also has a fantastic blog where he goes into deep dives on various creatures, really putting his bio knowledge to use.
Interesting.
Never read that bloody thing. Should.
You should. I post a whole one time a month, maybe.
If I finish my monster manual, will you do a deep dive on it?
Sure.
Oh god, I have to finish it.
The most recent deep dive I did was on Aarakocra, and it was all about the general response of people when they're like, oh, I have Aarakocra in my game, and people's immediate gut reactions being, no, you shouldn't do that, it's broken, and they list all these reasons why you shouldn't have it in your game. And it was essentially me saying that a lot of these reasons are not I think that Aarakocra are really cool, and I think that there are ways to incorporate them into your game in a way that doesn't make you treat them like you have to go out of your way to challenge them. And so I talked a bit about that, and then also about some minor tweaks you can make to them, because a lot of people, when they homebrew Aarakocra, I'm not sure, how familiar are you with, if I said, what do you think the top 3 trends of Aarakocra homebrew are?
Oh god, I'm not even going to pretend to try and guess. Tell me.
So, top 3 general trends are, flight is only at 5th level, you can only glide, or they just remove flight entirely.
Wow.
And it's like, yeah. Like, if you're altering the rates, because most people are just like, oh, you have a flying speed? No, I can't allow that. You can play this homebrew, though, in which the one, key part of what you are as a race is not accessible to you. Or, I've heard one case where a player was like, yeah, I played an Aarakocra, the DM was like, yeah, sure, that's fine. And in the first session, in the first combat, they had my wings torn off.
Oof.
And they were like, nope, sorry, no healing can repair them. Such a shame. And so they had to play the rest of the campaign as this wingless Aarakocra. Because the DM was just like, oh, if you can fly, that ruins my fun. And you break everything. And so it's not like, I don't know. I just wanted to get some stuff on my chest with that post, just about how I feel that you can use them in your games and it doesn't need to feel like a lot of effort. And I think that it's not a very popular post by any means, just because no one's seen it. But it's one I quite like.
No, but that's definitely interesting. I mean, I certainly agree with you. Like, a lot of the time, DMs aren't familiar with the challenges in general that revolve around flying creatures, and actually handling that in like on a session-to-session basis. Like, flying just doesn't come up very much, and people are very timid to even tackle it to begin with, just because they have to consider the third dimension in some way.
Yeah, I mean, D&D is very much not prepared to do 3D combat at all.
No.
No. And then, like, when flight does come up, you usually expect it to be higher levels, which is the main thing. It's like, if someone's like, oh, we're going to start at 10th level, then you can fly. But up until then, it's just seen as such a big leap that DMs just aren't prepared for it. And I think a lot of the time you get new DMs who are really interested in trying out all these new things, and then they go online and they're like, hey, I've got an Aarakocra in my group. What are some interesting things I can do? And they just get message after message of, that was a bad idea. That is like rule 1 of D&D. Rule 1, ban Aarakocra. Rule 2, revise Ranger. Like, it just creates this very niche mindset.
No, it's true, and I think the community can be quite self-limiting.
Isn't that called just gatekeeping? Like, there's so much gatekeeping in the larger nerd, in quotation marks, hobbies, that it's almost like, I remember when starting Magic the Gathering, I was like gate kept to hell and back.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think on DoMT, at least, we do pretty well. I mean, because we have people here who started off with D&D and have now moved on to other gaming systems. We have people who don't play D&D anymore, but they're still here anyway, and they talk in our other TTRPGs or in our in-depth channels. And a lot of the ideas of, oh, you have to play the game this way, they're being broken down step by step. And I think it's very good that we're doing that. That, like, yes, we're a homebrew service, so obviously there's going to be a sort of unwritten list of rules of things that are balanced and things that you should and should not do. But slowly, step by step, we're getting people to think, well, hang on a second, why does it have to be like that? And can people still have fun not doing that?
For sure.
In addition to our actual rules that you should read. Holy shit, you should read the rules.
In addition to the rules of the server, which are general conduct in all regards, like and just manners, we also have introduced a homebrew guidelines, which specifically outlines the kinds of frequently misbehaved actions, if you will, that we get in both the homebrew categories and the D&D categories. And one of the main things is that the person on the other end of the internet might not have the same goals and opinions about fun and balance that you do. And that RPG design is an art and not a science.
Very good point. And I think it's like surprising how easy it is for people to forget that in a space like this where you have so many creatives with some sometimes very strong opinions, that can become a thing. But yeah, it's definitely good that you guys are spearheading tackling that kind of a problem.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that will solve overnight, but I think the progress we have seen is good. That there's still a long way to go, but we're getting there.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, there is definitely some overlap between home brewing in general and the idea of the gatekeeping. So, like, you do end up with people essentially homebrewing to be restrictive or reductive rather than additive and inclusive, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like someone is trying to like forge a way. This is how it's done. There's no other way how to do it. And sure, if we throw balance in the room and say a good game of Dungeons and Dragons is balance, then you could argue for the same thing. The creators of the game have made some things unbalanced. Like Rogue is one of the classes frequently I've read that can break a game because the GM is not handling the damage output of the class very well, and then they go online and complain about how broken everything is, and but that is not like reflective. That is not talking to your players. That is not taking a step back, looking at your stuff and saying, hey, how can I deal with this differently? And are there sources out there who can give me an idea how to deal it back? They just blame the creators of the game for not making it right.
For sure. But I'm curious, do you think that that's a failing on behalf of Wizards of the Coast and the communication of the class to the player and the DM?
I wouldn't say it is a failing. That is like given that like value of failure is sort of problematic for my mindset. I would say it is a miscommunication or an interpretation issue. The only failures you could like pinpoint is the failure of Wizards of the Coast to communicate that better. But is that a failure on whose side? Or it's like the failure of the person who's reading the material horribly mishandling it and then ending up with a broken game. But is that who's to blame? Like, where's the failure? I don't know.
So to backtrack a bit on something Damian said in regards to like the framework of D&D not necessarily being balanced, I think that's something that people do not necessarily consider as much as they should. The fact that like we have things like Fireball that historically is unbalanced. It has a much higher damage output than any other spell of that level because it's a fireball and that's cool. And that I think people sort of, they see that there are numbers, they see that creatures have a challenge rating and that there is a way you're meant to calculate that. And they sort of go, oh, okay, this must all be formulaic. There must be a very precise science to this. And as NASA said previously, like a lot of D&D, it's an art, not a science. Like, for example, challenge rating, one of the ones that people treat very specifically. Like, that's based on an arbitrary set of values for an encounter with 4 players of that determined level. But, like, player characters can vary greatly. And that's not considered in CR or anything like that. So you get groups saying like, oh no, my group of like level 5 players absolutely annihilated this CR 10 monster. What could possibly have happened? Well, you look into the situation and like, well, okay, your group of of your level 5 players, well, there's 10 of them. That might have something to do with it. And then they've all min-maxed. They've all got like homebrew magic items and stuff. And like, a lot of people just trying to put exact values and trying to quantify something that is really a lot more wibbly-wobbly than they want it to be.
And yeah, I think that is a big part of D&D in a way, because like, I mean, so you have the player's handbook. The player's handbook is presented to you very matter of fact. Like, you have basically a rules reference book, and it's not until you really get into it and start playing that you start realizing that not all of this is going to be applied all the time. Your particular group may not want to use all of it. Like, you talk about the CR system, like even Wizards of the Coast don't use that system. They have their internal thing, which they use, which isn't representative. And that's where you end up with CRs for creatures in the monster manual, which don't match if you try and calculate them using the system they provided you in the DMG. So like, I almost wonder if part of D&D is this inconsistency and battling it out in the community, and if that's part of what brings the community together. is the discussion.
The community can be brought together a lot by being annoyed with the books and being annoyed with trying to make it all make internal sense and have internal consistency. I think like there are quite a few things though that Wizards of the Coast do, and that they do in D&D especially, that do not have that degree of internal consistency, that do not have as much time in the limelight. Like D&D is very much a game where that you have loads of options and loads of rules for loads of different things, and eventually you're just going to ignore some. And I think that's okay, but I also think at the same time that it can result in people forgetting that certain things are there, or it can result in people going, oh, you aren't playing it correctly unless you account for everything.
That is like a mindset that like the 3.5 or like the second edition grinders usually, that was like communicated to us, that it was very prevalent that there was a wrong and right one way to play Dungeons and Dragons. And one thing I heard that stuck with me is if you have to use the rules of the game, you're playing it wrong. That's one thing I heard. Like there is, and I'm on of the mindset there is no wrong or there's no right way to play Dungeons and Dragons, but there's certainly many wrong ways to play Dungeons and Dragons.
That kind of makes me consider all the OSR players out there who either predate the AD&D 3.5 the right way, wrong way to play, or they have their own conceptions as kind of a reaction to it. OSR is old school Renaissance or old school revival, where one of the emphases is that you don't have the answers to the problem that's being faced on your character sheet. It's in your head. The rules are there, but the ruling is what matters. In a specific situation, the player knowledge is more important than the character knowledge.
That's certainly an interesting approach, and from what I know, that is a much more old school way of approaching the game. I think it's definitely like Damian was saying, close to around 3.5 that we started getting a rule for everything.
3.5 had like a big old rule bloat. I didn't read 3.5 stuff, but I read Pathfinder, which is the closest approach that has like that has gone through revisions, and it is a lot. And at that point, it becomes a much crunchier, rules-heavy game, which is fine because that's what players of the game enjoy. And D&D, especially 5th edition now, is trying to balance approachability and having rules consistency and have them make sense on some meta level. Like you, for example, if you have a commoner and look at that stat block, and you'll notice that they have not many hit points. They have like 4. If they're lucky, they have 8. And then you take a giant rat and you put them together in a room, and the giant rat wins. So we know that these things are a threat, and Dungeons and Dragons, as a player, you are the hero. This is directly communicated through the mechanics of the game and the rules, that you are exceptional.
Absolutely. And
I get the appeal of having a game where you're not exceptional. That is like the old school revival Renaissance. That you are not exceptional. The world is deadly. But the more I play D&D, the more I like read the lore and all of its stuff, the more pulpy it gets. Like, it is pulp fiction. It is heroes. It's sword and sorcery. And it's nice. It's okay. It's like not the high rules, and it's not a story game. It is sort of in between. And I think that it's a fine space to occupy for a role-playing game. And I think it's also needed.
It's definitely changing to fit the times, because I think a big thing that people will often point to in terms of difficulty scaling is how the Tomb of Horrors has changed over the years. I mean, it's been re-released for every edition so far. Obviously, back in the day, legendarily deadly. Like, very much save or die, or just do something and die. And then on 5th edition, I think we had it in the... which book was it?
Tomb of Annihilation, wouldn't it be?
Well, the Tomb of Annihilation was the sequel, but they did re-release it in a pack of dungeons for 5th edition.
Oh, that would be Tales of the Yawning Portal.
That's the one, yeah. And that one, I think you could just slot it into a campaign. It's that easy to run. Like, it's not going to necessarily, like, straight up murder your party.
You have to kind of factor in the mindset of the player that has shifted. The older editions, the characters are much more disposable. Like, it was if you have it down, you could create a character pretty easily, and you're not like invested in them as much. In recent years, especially with the popularity of like personality driven actual play podcasts, there's much more emphasis of like investment in your character and how they look, what's the backstory, what are their quirks, which is not like intended. Like, it is not intended by the game itself. There's not much incentive to write a very detailed backstory. There's like seeds that you can just run with and have like make sense internally, but there's much more like on the player side. There's this is my precious baby. I worked on it like for a week, and wait, why did it die in the first session? It's a mentality shift.
Yeah.
And when a character dies in a very popular podcast, there's much mourning.
Yeah, like, there's people
much
actually
emotion to be had.
Feel it, like.
Yeah, it's actual feelings, because it's not like it moved from I have Steve the rogue, and that is my function, and that's my stand-in. This is not the stand-in. This is my avatar in this world. This is the person this is the person who pretends to be me, the character. I'm pretending to be this character in this world.
It's interesting because we've almost gone from much more of a very gamic kind of rule system to 5th edition, where I think very much unintentionally, like, it had a very large renaissance. You had a big incursion of people coming in, very good marketing, very accessible rule set. And now we've reached this point today where normally you would have 6th edition out by now. But in terms of the culture, we've shifted to it being a performance art, and it's all very much become like a way almost for you to channel like acting rather than gaming.
Yeah, and that comes with additional issues. This comes with a whole new set of gatekeeping, and we notice it a bit, not that much, I think, on the Discord of many things. But there's like this new set. If you are not like a professional voice actor as a GM, then you're doing something wrong. It's like when there is in Paris there are Japanese tourists, and there's always in the Japanese embassy there's always a psychologist on staff, therapist, because people come from Japan, work probably the whole year for a week in Paris, and then they come to Paris and they see, oh, it's just a city, and this is just so disappointing that they have to seek professional counseling. And that is sort of the same thing that sometimes happens when people who are fans of, for example, Critical Role, who have like a high ceiling of like quality voice acting, come to a regular game of D&D, and there's shorthand, there is just goofing around, just posting memes and stuff, and there's just like a regular game of D&D. There's just not that high acting happening that they assumed that would be, and that is an issue. And I've run into it at different times, not on the Discord or many things, but on other servers where it's like, yeah, if you're not having the whole production value of Matt Mercer, you're playing D&D wrong, and that's it. It's a whole new set of gatekeeping.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly problematic in its own way, and I almost feel like, I don't know if it would be a good idea to have like a new edition of D&D that caters more towards it as a performance, rather than it being necessarily like the same as the tabletop version.
Yeah, that's this line I mentioned. Trying to be, because you can do that, just a performance. You just can just grab any Powered by the Apocalypse game, and you have a brilliant acting session with a different person with minimal rules and like interpretation of abilities, and it's a whole thing. But you don't have like the sit down and play a game feel, like game nights or like board games, which D&D also does. And walking that line between story game and just crunchy OSR is often criticized by fans of either, but it's perfectly fine where it is, in my opinion.
And how's that sit with you, NASA?
I've been rearing back here since I heard crunchy OSR. I think that you've got maybe not a spectrum, or maybe a multi-dimensional spectrum of some sort that is narrativism and simulationism. And on the simulationist side, you've got like the 3.5s, the Pathfinders, even the Pathfinder 2Es, or you can even go back to some really old games, not GURPS, for instance, that are there's rules for everything, and it doesn't assume much trust between the players, the DM, and the system. It's like you've got these three pillars, and everyone has tools that they can use to interact with the other two pillars without necessarily doing too many things on the fly. And then you've got games that are primarily narrativist, which there are very few rules, and it relies on a lot of trust between the players, the DM, and the system. And those kinds of games, I think, do better in streams. And if you have a game that's somewhere in the middle in a stream, like on Critical Role, they'll tend to lean into the narrativist mechanics. And 5e, I think, is a fantastic compromise of these two kinds of sides. If you want to play it like 3.5, you can add back in conditional modifiers if you really want. Oh no. But at the same time, you can also say, well, I just don't feel like really using stat blocks today. And you can play 5e just fine like that as well.
That's true. I think actually that's a really good point, because it brings me back to a point that I've talked about before on this channel, where a lot of people have commented that modularity in the rules and like the structure of the game itself is most likely going to be the future of it, and Homebrew is a really good indicator of that, just to how accessible it makes the game, and plugging in and out different races like spells, items. You can already do that with the base game. Like, you're pretty much encouraged to, in the way that Wizards of the Coast's response to everything is usually it's up to the DM. The DM's fiat, like you can decide whether you want this rule or not. So every part of the game is customizable to you, right?
There is speculation in the dust that we will not get a 6th edition, but more like a 5.5, like 3.5.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I don't believe that there's any intentions on Wizards of the Coast part to make a 6th edition anytime soon, and I think it's been stated as much. But I almost feel like we, the community, in making homebrews, are creating our own 6th edition. It's just much more personalized.
From the lens of a game designer, that is probably how can we give the GMs or the players enough freedom in the system to move around and create these homebrews. That is also a very interesting topic to dissect. If you have like a more crunchy system, it's much harder to build homebrew because you have to consider many factors.
But you could also say that 5th edition is almost too non-committal, too vague even. If you have like so many rules at face value, but when you grind down to the specifics and like how things are applied in practice, you have the lead designers creating their own unique Twitter accounts, especially to answer people's questions. So I almost wonder if 5th edition is almost intentionally not specific enough so that you are encouraged to customize the game.
Could be. You'd have to talk to a designer, but it could be intentionally vague because there's so much emphasis on the DM in D&D that they have the final say, and that some stuff is intentionally vague so the DM rises up to the role of DM and has a personal ruling. But that could be coincidence, or that could be intentional. If it was intentional, very well done.
Well, that would be something, wouldn't it?
One of my favorite anecdotes about Gary Gygax is the way he would respond to people sending him letters, like asking him questions, or just talking to him at conventions. He would ask them in return, Socratically, how did you solve the issue? And he would listen to how they resolved whatever spell conundrum they were having or whatever thing. He says, and how did that work? And he would lead them to their own conclusions there instead of giving definitive answers. And my favorite sage advice quotes are the ones where Crawford or Merles or whoever will do that.
See, at the same time, though, because I was going to raise a counter to Damian's comment that, yes, Merles and Crawford will sometimes go like, oh, how did you solve it? But at the same time, on Twitter, they will give you rules of, no, we meant this in regards to how this particular ability is affected by unarmed combat or natural weapons. And so they're sort of, if that is their intent, it is unfortunate then that it is also comes side and side with rules where they have explicit meaning and that meaning is not conveyed well enough.
Mm-hmm. I suppose there is a difference in audience. If you're tweeting at a DM who is kind of better off just like doing something on that fits their table versus asking someone who's trying to make a supplement or whatever, like the homebrew people wanting to make things that aren't like broken, not in the overpowered sense, but in the they just don't work feature-wise kind of sense. I suppose there is a difference in the audience on those two kinds of questions.
Sure, and I think this kind of brings back to what I was saying. Like, if you take the most extreme approach to this, where you are essentially being encouraged to solve your own problems, and homebrew is a really good way for the community to pull together those ideas, even if it creates our own problems. You kind of run into the ship of Theseus, where how much of the game do you replace until it eventually becomes your own creation?
How many parts of the car makes a car?
Well, I mean, you've got NASA replacing the feat system with talent trees. You've got your own custom setting. You've got like custom classes, races, spells. Like you could have an entirely homebrew game with not a single drop of content from Wizards of the Coast.
It sounds like you are leading towards the conclusion that the apex of 5e design is the Wendys game that came out sometime last year.
Well, now I regret taking this path.
That assertion might be right. Wendys game is pretty great.
Except for the fact that like it doesn't work, but yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a fundamentally broken game. Like it's shipped without all the parts. Please self-assemble.
So we've solved the internet. The epitome of 5th edition design is Wendys edition.
You can quote Klaustrix on that.
Well, on that hot take, I think it's about time for another homebrew challenge. Next up, we have NASA. Could you come up with a wondrous item for us, please?
A wondrous item. This is the broadest category of magic item.
It's true. Do you need me to narrow it down for you?
No, I can come up with something. You rarely see legendary wondrous items or artifacts that are wondrous items.
Very true.
All right. It's the my thought process here. I enjoy permanent fixtures. Things like a well of immortality or something that is tied to a location. So the artifact isn't something you can easily pick up and carry around with you, but it is still a MacGuffin to be sought after with some kind of natural barriers around it. And so instead of immortality, if you had some sort of permanent fixture, perhaps a waterfall, in which you have a magical property of the water, perhaps kindness. So it's the waterfall of kindness.
Maybe it's the well of doubt.
You forget that it exists after you find it. I'm not sure if I found that or not. One of the deities in the Forgotten Realms is Eldath, the goddess of peace, whose symbol is a waterfall flowing into a still pond. And so you could have this fixture that is this waterfall into the still pond, and there could be some transformative effect when you find it. You could have it be some sort of alignment shift, but I'm not a huge fan of alignment. But something like those who drink from it can know the best intentions of everyone around them.
Ooh, like they get an aura of Zone of Truth or something.
So would the item be the well, or would the item be a bottle of that water?
You could have perhaps like a chalice or something, perhaps, if it's something that needs to be movable. I draw items very broadly. Like I think you could have a spren if you're a fan of Sanderson, or something like a spren, like a being that is a magic item or statted as a magic item. Or you could have something that's a soul mark, that is something that I just would describe as a wondrous magic item. Even though that you could also implement it as a boon or a feat or something like that. You've got a lot of flexibility in 5e when it comes to how you give your players stuff. So I would just highlight one of those kinds of things.
Very cool. So I think this is a good point to segue into the big topic. So we've had a massive surgence of discussion in the 5e, in tabletop role-playing community in general, really. I think with the advent of George Floyd's death, obviously there was a big push with the protests in America, lots of speaking out about racism and how race is handled, and that has trickled over into all kinds of communities, not just ours, wanting to do their part to make their areas more inclusive and changing the way that we approach things. This is obviously culminated, if you're aware, in 5e changing their approach to the drow and orc races. It might seem fairly out there to some listeners, but I think within the community, it's just the beginning of a more prevalent conversation we've been having. This is branched out into, like, I think there's an entire Discord that's built around this concept of more equality in game design, the Dice Thrower Union. There's been talking Matthew Colville's community about making D&D more disco and progressive. So how do you guys feel about this trend?
It's about damn time. Like,
well said.
Yeah, like a lot of what I've been doing since the unfortunate passing of Floyd is I've been shutting up and listening a lot more, because a lot of these conversations are ones that I just was not aware of previously. And I, being a mod on the server, I was quite cautious that if I tried to give some input or anything, there would be this sense of authority on the topic, or authority in general on the server, that just isn't mine to wield. So, I mean, like previously it was mentioned, my blog was mentioned. On there, I collected a big selection of articles and conversation pieces about racism in TTRPGs, and reading through them and just sort of getting myself informed on what the viewpoints in the conversation are has been very interesting and very frustrating. And I think now's just like a good time to be talking about it, because there are a lot of different viewpoints, a lot of good ones, a lot of confused ones, a lot of mixed ones, and having these conversations is just, it's good to see, finally. The only issue from our perspective, ours being staff on the server, is that when these conversations come up, people obviously are very passionate about them, and very duly so, but they can be passionate to such an extent that they do not listen to other people. And that when people come in saying like, hey, I don't quite understand, or hey, I do not hold that viewpoint, but I want to I want to engage you, I want to understand, that people just take that to immediately mean, oh, you're a lost cause. Oh, you aren't informed yet. And therefore, like, we're just gonna talk over you and talk at you until you understand it, until you agree with us. And that's just not how this is gonna work.
No, I absolutely agree. Any conversation with strong differing points of view requires the ability to listen and engage with one another. Both sides want to feel heard, and you can't do that if you're going into a conversation with the intention to change someone, right? Like, that just instigates conflict and exacerbates the tensions and breaks down the conversation, leading to people just spewing rhetoric.
Yeah. And then there's also the part where, for quite a few of these things, there isn't necessarily a very clear-cut answer on how to address them. For example, one that comes up quite a bit online is the discussion of, should we refer to races as races? And like, people suggesting like why race is a problematic term or alternative terms to use, and like people very much disagree on that field as to whether it is appropriate, what should we use as alternative names. And then of course a lot of people are now going for like ancestry systems, or they're changing how races work. Like I think recently one of the people who works in D&D suggested removing ability scores as being something that is given by race.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's been one of the easier things to tackle. You mentioned ancestry and culture as well. I think there's a book on DM's Guild called exactly that by Eugene Marshall that's quite interesting. Obviously, I've seen definitely more extreme examples of this conversation where people are even discussing whether it's okay to use the term master and dungeon master, whether the very concept of D&D in and of itself is appropriate, where you have a game that encourages you to play as characters that are inherently better than other people because you have some kind of special abilities, where you're often interacting with forms of government that intentionally oppress people, like kings and queens, and it follows these older tropes and stuff?
I mean, I think that's quite a large part of the conversation, is just sort of, if you're really going to go that far, and for everybody, that far is going to vary quite a bit. Because like personally, I would not say that having someone called the Dungeon Master is a problem, but evidently there are people who do, and I would be curious to see what their justification for it is, and what they would offer as an alternative.
For me, for me, this conversation about what is too far is somewhat reminiscent of the conversation of death of the author, where you can enjoy a medium on a level while acknowledging that the person who wrote it, who made it, was working with a different set of morals, of worldviews, of sort of all this being a completely different person, being from a completely different time. For example, Lovecraft is the prime suspect here, who was a horrible person. Probably, I didn't know this guy, but anecdotally he was. And still to this day, people enjoy that work, and while acknowledging the problem of the controversial nature of the author of those books.
It's a bit more awkward now, though, with TTRPGs, because the author isn't just some person who lived like however long ago, or some person who's just putting out Twitter things. In your D&D game, in your D&D campaign, the author is you. And you are now at a point where you are deciding what is being said. And yes, the source material that you are using, the Dungeon Master's Guide, the PHB, and so on, they have their issues. And people within Wizards of the Coast have pointed out these issues. I mean, recently we had Orion Black, who did a very good article on their experiences within Wizards of the Coast and working on Dungeons and Dragons. And various other things, like there's a very good article talking about recently mentioned Tomb of Annihilation, and I think it was calling Chult and the way they presented everything there as one step forward, two steps back. Like, yeah, there are those issues, but then you, as the author of your game, you are choosing what from that source material you are bringing to the table. And so it then becomes a thing of like, can you really like say, oh, it's death of the author in this case, when you're the one choosing what the words are.
It was just last week, a couple of weeks back, I was talking to Born to Do Stuff, who was talking about his experiences with growing up in a conservative family, and how he basically had to homebrew just to be able to play D&D without calling it D&D, so that he wouldn't have to use the rule books necessarily, which depict like things that his family wouldn't find appropriate. And essentially turning D&D into something completely different, while still using most of the rule set. So I think there is something to be said for being able to separate D&D from Wizards of the Coast in a sense, but you would have to not make use of any of the published content, right?
Yeah, but then like it's not just separating Wizards of the Coast from D&D, but when people are saying, oh, it's D&D itself that it has issues, like with the people saying, oh, D&D, a game that incentivizes working for these monarchistic rulers and going about oppressing other races of kobolds and goblins and the like
the colonial problems.
Yeah, or when you have race as being a key thing where you are mechanically better than other people, like with your +1 and your +2 with your ability scores and the like, that you can't really separate that from D&D because that is D&D. And I think a lot of the conversations at the moment are focused on, okay, how can we alter this? How can we make it work for within our games? Because yes, Wizards of the Coast are making progress and they're making steps in that direction, but they aren't necessarily addressing the issues that people are seeing as more critical. Like they'll include like, oh, it's great, we have a character who is part of the LGBT community. That's fantastic. They're still a race. They've still got a +2 strength because they are this race compared to this other one.
Yeah, it was definitely a little upsetting that Wizards of the Coast's first reaction was to essentially create a new product.
But what the question is also not only that they are a company whose goal is to make books and get money from that, but what other tools do they have instead of making just another book? Sure, you can have voices who say the things are a certain way, but what other than just revising and putting out more content do they have to improve upon that? Like, the ideal situation would be then 6th edition, just with all problems fixed, for free.
I mean, one way I would see about doing it is something that you yourself brought up, Damian, which was the popularity of D&D live streams and D&D podcasts and the like, where a lot of people are, let's be honest, a lot of people are learning the game rules from those. And like, if more people on like the D&D YouTube channel, the D&D Beyond YouTube channel, if they were saying like, okay, here are some things within the core mechanics that are problematic, and when we display it to people, when we show it to people in the most popular way to consume our product, these are the changes we are making.
So a more proactive, quicker mode of content.
Well, it's not quicker, it's more of, and one thing would be cheaper in terms of people having to consume and buy your product to find out, like...
I mean, did they release it as a Unearthed Arcana at all?
So, if I remember correctly, I think the new stuff in regards to races, that's coming out in their newest book, isn't it? I'm not sure if they made like an official statement on the side of, oh, we will no longer be treating drow and orcs in this particular way.
I know that they definitely did like some immediate changes to stuff and did like revised versions of... the Ravenloft one with Strahd and all that, because they have like a
of course, with the Vistani,
that are quite like the Romani.
Yes, yeah,
like they borrow from that culture for the design, and God knows they've had enough problems.
Yeah, and then they leaned heavily into stereotypes of them as well, of course.
Yeah.
If you don't do your like research or do like, if you put something, that's my pet peeve, if you just put something there because it looks cool and it feels nice, or you just know it and have not looked into it deeper, then you can be lucky and not be a dick about it, but you can veer into stereotypes and bad stereotypes. I'm not saying that all stereotypes are bad, because that's not, it is a negative connotation to the word stereotype, but in essence, it's just a writing tool.
Sure. Like, same way as you have tropes, right?
Yeah. It's stereotypes, tropes can be almost interchangeable. But if you do the bad tropes, then you get problems. And if you don't approach these things as evolved from a point in time where it was where these people had way bigger problems than they have now, being like almost like killed on sight in some cases. If you don't acknowledge that, if you don't see it as like problematic and address that in your fiction, in any fiction, then you become lazy and just not solving the issue, but just adding to the issue.
It's definitely a complicated issue.
It is.
Sorry, NASA, did I interrupt you there?
No, you're fine. I do have 2 points, though, I think.
Sure.
The first is a a perspective some people might not have, and the other one is maybe a potential solution, at least for part of this, in terms of WoTC and future products. Most of these problems aren't ones that are coming to Wizards of the Coast out of nowhere. Like, I don't think they're surprised by people bringing these up, because we've had authors, R.A. Salvatore, chief among them. He's one of the Forgotten Realms authors that is the most popular. They've been struggling with these issues in the books for decades. Drist, one of their key characters, is coming from essentially a monoculture that is evil matriarchal stereotypes and is confronting a world that views his people as inherently evil. And in the fiction are partially right in doing so. And then he's having to fight orcs, who are a similar kind of monoculture. And he meets a goblin. He meets one good goblin. And for several books in his asides, which happen every few chapters, he wonders to himself whether if this is fair, if this is right, if the gods have messed up, he has challenges of faith in the gods of Faerun because of these injustices he sees. And if you ask about the inherent morality or justice or divine providence of monarchies, there are Faerun is strewn with monarchies that are less than great, less than stellar, and are oppressive. And there are many books. Douglas Niles, one of the very early authors, talking about the inherent aspects of lordship and nobility in some of the very earliest Forgotten Realms books. So these are problems that have been struggled with in the books, but those struggles haven't transferred into the actual text in any of the source material books, into the actual gaming mechanics.
So, like, do you think it's fair to say that, I mean, D&D in and of itself has always been quite backwards facing. Like, in terms of the setting is intentionally historic, like back at a point where these problems may have been prevalent, where you are playing with like monarch systems because that's what existed in this particular time period. Not that D&D is set in any time period. I mean, I think Matthew Colville's described it as the Fantasyland setting, where it is no distinct time period, but it is intentionally or inherently archaic in form and fashion. So is it more that people are only just waking up to this, maybe?
It's always been like, when I view Dungeons and Dragons, I see pulp fantasy. It is pulp fantasy. It is rooted in Lord of the Rings. It is. It takes inspiration from old fantasy books, where it was Conan the Barbarian, where it was like very archetypal, and what's the word? They're very defining in their like structure and in their very morality, even that Dungeons and Dragons deals in. And the one mistake I feel like they view fourth edition wasn't selling very well. So what they did was go back and try to find what worked. And instead of subverting our expectations, they took a step back and gave what they thought we wanted. Just a pulp fantasy game with all the negative and bad tropes that comes with. And then it exploded in popularity, and these conversations they found themselves in. Instead of just making a pulp fantasy book, you are defining a subculture now, and you have to address these issues now. And I don't think they necessarily were expecting that. They can critique it in their fiction, yes, like in the Forgotten Realms books, but that they have to actually deal with these issues, I don't think they could have foreseen. And now they are trying to take a step back and look at what they have written and what they have done and how it's contributing to the society. Because what they primarily wanted to do with D&D, if we look at at 4th edition, is to give people what they enjoyed back when they played in the 80s in the basement. And that comes with issues, because fiction rooted way back with a very different mindset gives bad tropes, bad stereotypes.
Sure, and it's also probably fair to say that progressivism has only more recently become in vogue. Like, if it wasn't for the George Floyd situation, I don't know that we would be having this conversation.
I think this conversation would still be going on. It would just be going on to it would be less in the limelight, sure.
That's a better way of putting it, yeah. Like, it would be being had, but not necessarily as loudly.
I don't think the people who need to hear it would be hearing it.
Yeah.
The way forward is one that is going to require a bit of care on the part of Wizards of the Coast, and also on individual DMs, because, as Nerdhogg said, when the author is not dead when you're the author. And so something I can recommend for people who just want to avoid many of these problems is to avoid monocultures in their games, saying all instances of orc have this culture and this god, etc. Instead, build your cultures either regionally, and then decide what are the prominent races in those regions, and like what are the cultures and subcultures that they have, and allowing you to like cross lines and cross boundaries, to have someone from far in the north and someone far in the south who are both orcs be completely different.
I think a good approach also would be to view every published book with the fallible author. Like, I think it's what's his face? Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Has a fucking, what's the name? I had a good point here. Fuck. No, that we view the books as like written by someone who doesn't know the full picture. Like, these aren't just the observation of one person who drew the wrong conclusions. Like, just having like an isolated incident and then just having it just assume that everyone else is like that. And if you approach it like that, you can say, yeah, this is true for this one culture, this one small tribe of people. But you as the GM are now tasked with finding the other cultures of these people. Because the book didn't provide it, so you have to.
Yeah, and I think one thing we're probably going to see is a slight migration out of D&D, because I think for those who have the problem with things like the term Dungeon Master, or with the setting in and of itself, like the Fantasyland setting, and much of the base content, those people are absolutely going to move away from Wizards of the Coast, move on to other games. And then I think of those who remain, how much of a problem you have with Wizards of the Coast as a company is going to be the next like gateway. I think if you can move past that, then probably Homebrew is going to be your next best bet for solving a lot of these inherent problems.
Yeah, I think we're going to find more and more Homebrew moving away from, oh, here's this subclass I came up with, or here's this stat block. I think it's going to move more and more onto the system itself. And we're already seeing that with like various D&D hacks or games based on D&D, but removing the aspects that are problematic, and then whilst they're at it, they will also go ahead and they'll homebrew the things that they just personally don't like and fine tune and tweak as they go. So what we may just end up with is a lot more like 5e likes, I guess, to take the Dark Souls term, like games that aren't quite 5e, but they've had each individual person's mark on them.
Did they used to call them heartbreakers?
Fantasy Heartbreaker. Go on itch.io. You can find a massive graveyard of them.
I may very well do so.
I think you're right, though. I think that for those that care about this enough, like, the future is going to be recontextualizing D&D if you want it to remain. I mean, we've never been in the situation before where the very premise of the game is the thing that people largely want changed. I think in every edition, you've always had your Faerun or Forgotten Realms or like your generic setting that you can run with. This change on this scale, I think it is going to, as you say, lead into those heartbreakers. Like, I think ones we've seen recently are like Humblewood, where you kind of have that two-tier society, but it's based on birds of prey and the forest animals, and you're all playing as those animals in like a wood setting with like fire is like the greatest threat to them.
I mean, I haven't personally read Humblewood. It gives me very strong Redwall vibes, though, and I wonder, like, was that made with the intention of combating some of the Wizards of the Coast issues?
You mean Humblewood?
Yeah.
As far as I know, it was a kickstarted campaign setting that was largely popular just because it was playing as fantasy animals. It kind of had that Disney vibe.
I do kind of wonder, though, if people are going to be looking for alternatives to 5e, especially if it's to do with the racism issue. Whether a game where you are playing species is going to... like, is that going to be the way to go? Because I've seen quite a few people saying, like, oh, the issue with D&D races is that they're called races. Let's just change it to species, which is a much more accurate term. Which, like, firstly, from like a biology background, in this case, no, it's not. But also on top of that, like, I don't think changing the word is necessarily the be-all and end-all. I don't think that's a step forward, but I don't think it's the only one.
For sure. Like, I think it's going to be a little disappointing if the largest changes we get are semantic. Like, if you're no longer using the term dungeon master, you're just saying storyteller or any of the millions of other terms that all the other games use. Or if you're just, as you say, not using races, just species or whatever. Like, it's not going to be... I mean, first of all, it's not going to be progressive, but at the same time, I think it's interesting that we have the potential for this whole new game to be born at this point. Like, this could be a massive turning point, not only in the culture, but also in the game in and of itself, right?
It could be. My gut says it's not going to be, because even though we're, like, talking about these big changes and various people having these little splinter ideas of what they can do, it's still Wizards of the Coast, it's still Hasbro. It's still such a monolith in all of this.
True. And given the trouble that we've heard about within Wizards of the Coast in terms of their support of diversity and just in their employees, has been really disappointing to hear.
Disappointing and unsurprising.
I think there will be changes. I think even before 2020, when the conversation really started to spike, at least here, that there were inklings of some of these things changing already. In the most recent Drizzt novel, the structure of Menzoberranzan is changing. The way Lolth is dealing with people is changing. In some of the older Drizzt books, they've planted seeds that I think Wizards could really build on in terms of orcs and dwarves living together and having relationships that are not based on animosity.
And how do you see, what I suppose would be a better question to ask, What changes have you already seen appearing within, say, the Discord itself?
We have an in-depth discussion channel, which is where we primarily restrict these kinds of conversations to occur because it has a slow mode timer, so people can are somewhat forced to actually read what other people are posting and to engage with each other in a slightly more long form way. And I think that's actually helped quite a bit. These conversations pick up every few days, sometimes every few weeks, and they have some very interesting perspectives from people who are both very aware of the historic context of orcs and people who are new coming onto the scene and not necessarily understanding. And we've had to deal with a few people who come in and who are very belligerent on one side of the issue or the other. And I don't even think they're necessarily just two issues or just two sides, if you will. Like, I don't think people are actually too fundamentally opposed when it comes to not wanting to be racist or to like hurt people, right? Like, it's just a matter of, do they think they're hurting people and what kind of interactions they're having at the table or in their lives.
That's fair. I mean, it's great that the Discord itself allows for these in-depth discussions. I suppose, have you seen much come out of them, though? Are you seeing a change at all in the kind of brews people are working on?
I'm not sure in terms of the kinds of homebrew, but I have definitely seen very productive discussions where people learn things, where people come to understand each other and form relationships in meaningful ways. That's the ideal. That's when things are working right. When they're not, you tend to have people just talking past each other, and that doesn't happen just on DoMT, but that happens anywhere on the internet or even in day-to-day life.
No, that absolutely is encouraging to hear.
We are also trying to be very delicate with these conversations and monitoring. Whenever this comes up, we are monitoring these conversations just to see if they are still being productive or it's just yelling at each other.
Yeah, it must be difficult as moderators to know where the line is exactly for when to step in.
100%, yes. It's an awkward thing, especially because, I mean, of the three members of staff you have now, we aren't really people who are necessarily the most affected by these kind of conversations. You know, like, I think I speak for myself, NASA, and Damian. We're all like white Caucasian men.
Oh, same.
You know?
Same, yeah.
And yeah, so when we're then going in saying, "Oh, I think this conversation has reached its point. I think we've had a bit too much now." Like, we're coming at it with that baggage. And
we don't have authority in that point.
The British know this problem so well.
Yeah, I hear you.
The main thing we moderate for is civility in terms of these in-depth discussions. We take generally a fairly moderate stance. However, we will take stands when anyone is actively stepping over the line. And we do have a content filter for things like slurs and stuff like that.
Also, like, what is a slur? How do we approach it? And the moderation stance is not only to like warn people and tell them what they did wrong, but also like engage them and try to talk to them and hopefully improve some behavioral issue. Like, not only like just being the wall of no, that's not what you're allowed to do, but also try to steer them into a more thoughtful, productive direction that is being a mod on the server.
Absolutely. We're probably the second or third generation of mods, if you would, since the server's been founded. And I'm very glad that we inherited a bit of this atmosphere, that this is a 7,000 member server, and it's the only server I've been on of that size that deals with these problems not just as a, hey, stop that, go away, but as a, we try to talk to the users and improve them over time. Like we talk to people and build relationships with some people that might not be welcome some other places.
It also helps that a perceived issue is always a teachable moment. So if you set up boundaries, you also have to explain why you set these boundaries instead of just enforcing them.
Absolutely. And I think, as you say, like, we are all like white guys who don't necessarily have much to contribute. So it's important that everyone else in the world is allowed to have a place that they can discuss these things and be able to express themselves in like a judgment-free environment.
Like, we have some people on the server who are taking a very proactive role in sort of having a look at the stuff that is in D&D and discussing it and about why it might be problematic and how it could be changed, to sort of shoehorn in a bit of a promotion. I know one of our users here is a member of a YouTube channel called Asians Represent. And one of the big things they're doing, for example, is looking through like AD&D's Oriental Adventures and discussing that. And then looking through 5th edition as a whole, like the different classes and everything, and how that would work for something like Oriental Adventures when you're doing something with a game inspired by Asia and more specific countries within that continent. And I think it's really good to see that even though we're not necessarily seeing Homebrew come from it, we're seeing people proactively going like, okay, these are the conversations going on in the server right now. How can I apply that to my table? How can I discuss that with my players? And so one thing that's been quite good that I've seen in a lot of channels and in depth especially is the sharing of resources, which has really been just good to see.
And I've definitely seen a lot of really interesting people on Twitter at the minute. I'm just going to quickly bring that up. Here we go, I found him. Kazumi Chin. He is a tabletop author who's been working on some really interesting stuff, and definitely bringing to light a lot of really good topics for discussion, not only around like Orientalism was something he covered recently, but also on like bringing up and signal boosting more interesting approaches to tabletop RPGs in the Itch.io communities.
Yeah, I mean, Itch.io obviously is a bit more focused on video games and the like, but there are a lot of interesting tabletop games on there. And also the fact that it's allowing people to just try out wacky ideas. For example, I recently worked on one on there with a fellow member of the server, which you can get for free now. And it's really good to just sort of like be able to try that stuff out and be able to see what kind of stuff people are coming up with all of these current issues in mind. And also like once they've, had their run with doing homebrew of D&D and the like, and have seen other games and think, you know what, I want to give something a go and see what kind of content I can come up with that's original to me. Absolutely.
And do you guys have much space on the server for brew discussion outside of D&D? I think it's just the one chat channel, right?
Yeah, at the moment it's predominantly just other TTRPGs. The reason being because this is the Discord server for the r/Unearthed Arcana subreddit. We wanted to focus it mostly on 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. We found in the past that the one channel's been pretty okay for the amount of people that we have coming here to discuss other games. Most people who are wanting to discuss like itch.io games and the like usually are finding other communities either through our server and we're redirecting them there, or they're just going straight to them.
That makes total sense.
we do have game design, like general game design principle discussion, which often occurs in in-depth discussion. Because 5e is such a middle ground in the way people play it, a lot of the things you take from making good 5e homebrew or just from GMing 5e can segue into broader discussions that are useful in designing your own games.
That's a good point. I mean, 5th edition tends to be like a starting or launching point for a lot of people. I think in terms of like, if you're going to get started in RGPs, you mostly tend to start with D&D just because it is so prevalent. So as you say, it can be a really good place to begin your wider career. And it has a lot of transferable skills in that sense.
And you have the audience, because people will listen and people will respond if it's about Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh yeah, there's all times of the day, there's always going to be someone on DoMT looking for either help with something that you might have familiarity with, or that will be there to be able to answer questions for you.
And I have sourced personally players from this server for other games as well. I play Pendragon, I play Burning Wheel, and I play Blades in the Dark, all three with users that I met or connected with through a second person from DoMT.
Because yeah, I mean, as you say, the primary part of Dom is that it is a community first and foremost. It's a really good place to be able to network with people, and I mean, sure, you're going to have like the massive homebrew section of the channel, but also you can post up like all kinds of resources, right?
We have a resources channel.
We have a resources category consisting of many channels, including help with maps, help with art, for posting and discussing long form content in terms of like major blog articles or books, music, miniatures. And then we have each individual channel also has pinned resources or pinned discussions that have been helpful or generally broadly applicable to either new people or to people who are wanting to keep that resource somewhere handy.
Yeah, I've definitely peeked in there a couple of times mid-game to be able to pick up ideas.
Mid-game?
Yeah, man.
You mad lad.
You take what you can get. And then in between my own sessions, I always go into things like world building, character discussions for building characters, the adventure modules for looking at official content and dissecting it, getting people's ideas. Like when I was playing Dragon Heist, I think it was the adventure modules that pointed me to some amazing resources you can find on the 5e Reddit, the Unearthed Arcana Reddit, that also link in with stuff on DM's Guild that massively just expands upon that whole game, made it way more enjoyable.
Yeah, you sort of get the notion from just listening to people on this server that Homebrew enhances the modules quite considerably, but both in terms of the quantity of content, but also in terms of the quality of what you're getting out of them.
Yeah, someone who actually didn't play modules very often, I think, yeah, like Dragon Heist was probably one of the first modules I've ever run. It was surprising how much the homebrew content really did enhance the game. Like, very, very mild spoilers for that. In Chapter 2, you get this, you get gifted an inn, basically. So you guys are, players are running their own tavern for a little bit. And there's tons of content out there for renovating it, building it back up from like basically being ruined after being dilapidated for so long. Like extra characters that can be included in there, extra ways to handle the rooms and the content that revolves around it. Like it was really amazing to me.
Some call it intentional. Others call it lazy game design.
Well, it was almost like Wizards came up with a nice idea. The idea that your players inherit a tavern, and then the community just really ran wild with it and made it much... they like explored the idea to its fullest.
I do wonder to what extent, though, their mindset, because we were talking previously about like intentional vagueness, whether the mindset was, oh, the DM will just come up with stuff the players can do in this tavern until they move on to the next bit. Whereas a lot of D&D players I find are like a lot more mechanic minded in terms of, no, I can't just have fun. I need rules for this, damn it. I need to know what saving throws I need to make to reinstall things in this tavern.
What was the saying? Never attribute to malice what can be explained by stupidity or by incompetence.
Yeah, that's probably fair to say. Still, if something good comes out of the lazy design, then I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. So we're coming up to time here. Before we finish up, I remember that we still have one more magic item challenge. This one for Mr. Nerdhogg.
All right.
This one might be a little easier, I don't know. Could you produce for us a quick brew potion?
A potion? Oh boy. Do I get a theme for this one that I can go with or ignore?
Sure, if you'd like a theme.
Sure.
Let's say art.
Okay. Mine is called the potion of... I want to call it potion of inspiration, but that sounds boring. So I'm going to call it Musicer. And when you down it, you go into an intense period of creative liberty. During that time, you have expertise with any and all artisans' tools. However, you are basically compelled for the entire duration of a long rest to create a great work of art. If a creature spends a minute observing this work of art, then they gain something like D8 or D10 of bardic inspiration for that entire day. The downside is every time you down it, you take like 2 levels of exhaustion as you just like work non-stop for however long creating this damn thing.
Love it.
Fantastic. And I love items that have a broader implication on the world, because now there are these works of art out there that inspire you by looking at them, and you could build whole monasteries and things around protecting or having pilgrims go and see these things.
And then you go up with the light up mace and punch them so they have better ideas.
It's actually an interesting idea, like having a famous work of art that begets work of art. So you end up with this mimetic kind of feedback loop of, say, a statue that inspires you to create a temple around it, that inspires you to create a castle around the temple, and then a city around the castle, and eventually people have to invade them just to stop them from building.
I can see the SCP.
Isn't that the plot of Guns? No, Blame.
I actually don't know.
Blame was, I think, just a runaway building robots that just kept building and building and building and building and building.
Oh, like a Grey Goose scenario.
The inspirations for me were gnomes in regards to them creating stuff, and then also Dwarf Fortress, where your dwarves after a while go into an intense period of needing to make a great work. And I just thought that combining the two of them together would be quite cool.
Fantastic.
In all seriousness, though, this was a really good conversation, and thank you for having us for it.
Oh, thank you guys. Like, honestly, it's been really cool to have this nice roundtable discussion, getting into it. If our fabulous viewers out there want to get in touch or get into Discord or anything involving what we talked about today, where can they get you guys at?
Our Unearthed Arcana has a link to us in the sidebar. So that's probably the easiest way to find us. You don't have to have a Reddit account in order to find that link. Let me see if you can find us just by Googling.
I'll put a link in the description.
Perfect. If you do Google the Discord of Many Things, the top result is a series of Reddit posts, old advertising posts by some of our former mods. And so, yeah, those invite links should also still be valid. If anyone listening wants to come on down to the Discord of Many Things and have a voice chat with any of us, I would be more than happy.
Fantastic. And for Damian, do you have any call to action you want to throw out there, like a Patreon, a website, a store, a link?
Like, no, you can just hit me up on Discord. I'll probably talk to you. On Reddit I am Damian Drashar, I think. Yeah.
Perfect. And for you, NASA?
Yes. If you want to contact me, the easiest way is through either Reddit or Discord. You can also email me at imfromnasa@gmail.com. For anyone wondering, I'm not actually from NASA, but I do have a physics degree.
It's close enough. And last of all, but not least, we have Mr. Nerdhogg.
If you would like to follow my content, then you can find it on nerdhogg.blogspot.com. That's NERDHOGG. Alternatively, if you are not so interested in D&D, but you are interested in crabs, because I assure you, you are somewhere on that dichotomy. If you go on itch.io and look up Crabtastrophe, that is a game that I have made with a friend of mine in which you play a crab and you steal eldritch artifacts. But if you want to talk to me, the best way to do that is on the Discord of Many Things.
Excellent. Thank you all again for coming. It's been absolutely lovely having you all on. Hopefully we can talk to each of you individually at some point, get a little more personable.
I was really into that up until the very last word.
Is that a threat?
I don't know. It's either a threat or it's a pickup line. I'm not sure which I'm more worried about.
It's whatever you want it to be.
I like the pickup line more, actually.
I'd be glad to come back on. This has been a fantastic experience.
Agreed.
Oh yeah, sure.
That a boy. we got him, boys. We got him free for free.
No, it was really nice. I love talking to people. I love this. This is good. I like this.
Awesome. Well, with that, I shall bid you a good night each, and thank you once again. It's been absolutely lovely, and looking forward to chatting again at some point. Thanks to Damian, NASA, and Nerdhogg for joining us. If you want to check out the Unearthed Arcana Reddit, join the Discord of Many Things community, or follow any of our guests' work, there are links in the description. And remember that users who Nitro Boost the Discord will get access to an exclusive lounge channel and custom emoji of their choice. Last but not least, thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you're enjoying the series, remember to subscribe, hit the like button, and click the bell icon as an item interaction so you get notified when the next video goes up. Until the next adventure, stay safe.